how the hell are you not busy? How has that come to be for you? And you basically said, the TLDR is this in 30 seconds. You said, Nick, I realized a long time ago that all the stuff that moves the needle forward is the stuff in the is the stuff in the important, not urgent category. Every single time I do that, it moves the business forward, and everything else can basically wait. A lot of urgencies are fake. People think things are urgent. They're generally not. I take a lot of time throughout the week. I focus on the non-urgent important work, and things move forward for my business. Mate, like that small conversation changed my life. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was that I needed permission to do this, and I needed permission from somebody in a similar space that was ahead of me. And so sincerely, brother, thank you for that, because I couldn't tell you, that was the demarcation line for when I stopped burning out and I could start living life again. And so like I tip my cap to you in all sincerity. And I wanted to riff on that, if you are okay with it. Can you bring to light your philosophy? Do you have a clear philosophy on this, or was that a moment in time that you want me to recount for you a little bit more?
No, I totally hear that. And it's a conversation I have a lot with friends of mine who are founder CEOs. It's a common thing. They're always busy. And I think this is probably a controversial statement, but I think busy is a choice. You can choose to always be reactive to things, or you can choose to have your priorities straight and focus on what's important to you. When somebody says, I can't do it, I'm too busy, it really either means one of two things, which is they don't have their shit together, just in general, or two, this is not a priority for them. So like if you've maybe, I'm usually pretty direct in my communication. I rarely will say, sorry, I can't, I'm busy. And Jackie will also say this, like some of the podcasts that we've declined recently, it's like, we don't say, sorry, we're too busy, we can't do podcasts. It's more like, sorry, this is not currently on our roadmap and we are not prioritizing this right now. Right? That's not the same thing as saying like, oh, I'm just busy. Because busy is almost like, it's almost like you're accepting that the world is happening to you. Like you're the passenger, not the driver. It's like, I'm just so busy. All these things are happening to me and I can't control my own life. But if you view it from the other perspective, another thing that I say to our team often is don't let recency determine your priority. This ties into the Eisenhower matrix.
Wow.
Just because somebody says like, hey, I need you to do this in the next 24 hours. We had a very specific example. There was a reporter from the Washington Post who sent us an email and said, hey, we're writing the story. We need you to get back to us in 24 hours. And in the past, this would have put our whole team in a frenzy. Like, oh my God, we have to stop everything and do this. But we're now pretty well trained in this, where we look at our priority list, and media was a priority like 2 or 3 years ago. Getting another media placement in the Washington Post, it's just like, it's not a priority. So we said, no thanks. And that's it. It's not our priority. It was a part of our strategy a few years ago. It's just not right now. And so most people, a lot of the CEOs I know, they live in their cell phones and they live in text messaging. They're super reactive. It's like everything's on fire all the time. They always need to respond to everything. They've always got to have their phone on them. But that's not how it needs to be. And it's usually the wrong way to be. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but that's, I think, a big part of it.
That I know Omid is mincing thoughts, and I want to go to him because I know we talked about this beforehand, and I've actually recanted that story to a few friends just because I couldn't really capture the insight without just sharing the story. And the reaction is just, oh my gosh. That was incredible, by the way. What I took from that, and what I also took from our conversation a few months ago, was what you just said. And you said something to the tune that made me believe that a lot of things that are urgent they just seem urgent. They're not actually urgent. And so if you test them, you realize that there's really not a lot of downside into just letting go. And the downside might look like a small slap on the wrist, a small, hey man, I thought you were going to get that done. If that, sometimes it's non-existent. And we live in this world where we're always, I think, reacting to urgent things instead of responding. And so how did do you feel that way? this is kind of Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week stuff. Like the urgent stuff is really fake urgency in a lot of situations. And I think in the Eisenhower matrix, it literally says delegate it. I think there should be an addition that says just forget about it too, because a lot of urgent stuff you can forget about. So how do you treat this urgent category? Because what I've been fighting is people pleasing, because ultimately what you end up doing is people pleasing. Have you fought that? Have you encountered that? Is that a thing for you? How do you treat these things that seem urgent and aren't, especially on the days that it's hard, that you actually feel like, oh, this really does feel urgent? How do you go about that, Sam?
There definitely are things that are urgent that come up, but they're just a lot less frequent than people expect. Like I was talking to Mike Haney, who's our editorial director, about this because we had a fire drill, like a thing. It's like, hey, everyone, drop what you're doing. I need this done by the end of day so that we can send it to these people. And he made a comment along the lines of, I've been here for 3 years, and I think this is the second time that this has happened. And it's not going to be zero. Like there are times when it's like, hey, this thing came up, this is actually important, and it aligns to our priorities. Whatever else you're doing should stop because this is both important and high urgency. Let's get this done. But there's this really interesting thing. What was that book that I read? Somebody wrote a book. Was it Severs? He wrote a book about, it was like 25 conflicting pieces of life advice, which is like, it's a really funny book because he starts with like, the best way to live your life is X. And then chapter 2 is the worst way to live your life is X. And they're both equally plausible. It's a really interesting read. And when I tell people, me as the CEO, it's like, actually, I'm not particularly stressed out and very little of what comes my way is urgent. And it's like, well, that's just because you're the CEO. And so you can control your time however you want. And if I was telling the opposite, it's like, well, my life is pretty chaotic because I'm the CEO. So like, I'm always on my phone. Everything. They're like, oh yeah, that makes sense because you're the CEO. So it can go whichever way you want. You have a lot more control over these things than you expect. I think one interesting example, and actually bringing Jackie into this picture, is I also struggle with the people pleasing part of it. And so, for example, I have a really hard time saying no to things. Like I get invited to go on podcasts and a lot of them I just don't want to do. And instead of me saying no, I just say, hey, let me loop in Jackie. She makes the call on these things. And then Jackie politely declines.
Oh my God.
Because she does not have an issue saying no. And so I let Jackie make the decision. Some tiny part of it is Jackie will research the podcast to see, is this aligned with our goals? But mostly it's just so I don't have to feel weird about people pleasing and saying no to things. And she's just better at it than I am. So sometimes having that separation really helps and coming up with systems around it. There was one thing that you said that I'm curious to maybe get some specifics on, which is you said sometimes it's okay to not do things and then get like a slap on the wrist for it. I'm curious what you meant by that.
Yeah, I'm happy to explain. And so my experience is that some of the things that seem urgent and quote unquote important, they're A, not important to me because they're not my priority. And B, they're urgent not for me, they're urgent for someone else. And so if I forego doing them, my observation is that one of two things usually happen. It's that nothing happens is what often happens. Nothing happens. The second thing is that somebody will mention something and they'll say, hey, I thought that you were going to get this done, etc. I asked you to do it. And then I just politely talk them through it. I let them know I wasn't coming from a malicious place. I was prioritizing something else. I'm happy to get it done at this time. That rarely happens to me. What's interesting is that what I think would happen before you and I had that conversation was much different. I thought it was going to have a catastrophic result. Catastrophic in the sense I'm going to get fired, I'm going to get chewed out, I'll lose the book of business, etc. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that clarifies it a little bit. So I'm just making some ginger tea.
Yeah. That's fine, man. Make it away.
Yeah.
I love it. Is that the Levels office, by the way, or is that your place?
Yes to both.
Nice.
we're a fully remote team, so this is also the Levels office.
Where are you? Sorry, I think I asked you this at the beginning. Where are you based? You're in SF, right?
I'm in San Francisco these days. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really nice place in SF, man.
Yeah, it's a friend's house.
Yeah,
it's good.
I love it. Anyway, sorry to derail you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I agree with your assessment.
Talk to me.
So I think it's really important to set clear expectations, especially for people on your team. One of our cultural values, I did a podcast with my co-founder on this. What we often tell people is a lack of communication is a lack of performance. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's not this like peripheral thing that you're supposed to do. It is your job is to communicate. We've had specific examples where this is especially true when you're remote, but we've had specific examples where people have said like, well, I did my job right, I just didn't communicate well. It's like, no. A lack of communication is a lack of performance. You did not do your job well because you did not communicate. A lot of people see it, again, as this like, it's a secondary skill. It's not core to their job, but that's just incorrect. So I think when it comes to things like somebody on your team says, hey, I need you to do this thing by tomorrow. The way that we would see this done at Levels is you might say, actually, I can give you some really good specific examples of people on our team who have done this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would love that.
Where if I tell somebody on our team, hey, I need you to do this thing by Friday, the answer is not like, I can't, I'm busy, right? Because like we all have the same amount of time. This is another thing that I often hear people say, I don't have time for that. It's like, actually, you have the same amount of time as everybody else. We've all got the same amount of time. You just have different priorities, and that's okay, but don't pretend like you just don't have time to do this. So a really good way that I've seen this done on our team is people will say like, cool, I can do this by Friday, but here are my 5 priorities in order. And if I'm going to do this for you, these 2 are not going to get done.
Wow, that's really good.
Dude, that is okay. No, go ahead. It looks like you were going. Yeah, please. Yeah.
And that gives you visibility. I would say 3 out of 4 times, the way that ends up happening is somebody on our team will tell me that, and I'll say, oh, yeah, you're right. Never mind. How soon can you have this done? And they'll say, I can have it done next Wednesday. And they say, all right, that's too long from now. Let me talk to somebody else and have them do it because they might have more capacity, as opposed to just ambiguously dropping the ball. But also it makes it super clear. Like if they ask you to do it and then you do, but then you drop these other balls, they can't get upset with you, because when you're communicating well, you're saying, look, these are my priorities. From what I'm gathering, based on what we've talked about in the past, this actually is not my priority. Do you agree or disagree? And then maybe there's some context that you're missing, that this thing is actually the highest priority. But that's where the communication gap can happen. So I think just being really explicit is super important, and not just ambiguously dropping the ball.